All right, this video is on the Declaration of Independence, and we'll call it Fundamental Respect for Each Other. So, we talked in the first video about the founding being exceptional in the history of the world because it tried to devise a system where the ruled and the rulers were the same, as opposed to the rulers making rules that the ruled had to follow, but the rulers didn't have to follow, that the rulers and ruled would be the same. As we'll discuss going forward, there were plenty of people who that didn't go for. Women didn't have the right to vote and didn't have equal rights, and ethnic minorities and racial minorities also didn't. So lots of exceptions, unfortunately. We'll talk about those as we go. It's important to note that there were plenty of people in the colonies who didn't really care about the nobility of the Declaration of Independence. They wanted to be independent because they realized they were being taxed and the fruits of their labor were being taken by somebody else. They were not necessarily committed to the idea that they themselves couldn't do that same thing to somebody else and take the fruits of their labor. They just didn't want the fruits of their own labor taken, and they thought England was taking theirs, and they wanted to be free of that. So there's two groups at the beginning of the country on this issue. There's some that are like, yeah, life's about getting power and getting as much power as you can and subjecting other people to your rule and not being subjected to their rule. But there are others for whom the country is unique and exceptional because it has the opportunity to govern itself in a way that keeps people from taking the fruits of anybody else's labor at all. So those are the two groups. The group that just doesn't want to have their own labors taken by somebody else, and those who don't want anyone taking the fruits of anyone else's labor. So Thomas Jefferson writes these lines in the preamble to the Declaration that have been mimicked in so many constitutions and documents throughout the world since. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So we're going to ask that you commit these words to memory and know them throughout the year and take them with you into the world. They're beautiful lines that are extraordinary in the history of the country, and let's talk about them. So what are the claims here? All men are created equal. All men are endowed by their Creator with unalienable rights. Life is an unalienable right. Liberty is an unalienable right. And the pursuit of happiness is an unalienable right. And so let's talk about these individually. So equality. All men are created equal. All men have the same natural worth as men at the beginning. The differences in ability or wealth or social standing do not entitle men to be treated differently before the law. So that's what that means. All men are created equal before the law. There aren't kings and nobles who don't have to obey the laws that other people have to obey. Everybody's supposed to obey the same laws. So all men are endowed by their Creator with unalienable rights. So that means that men are born with rights that if you took them away, you'd be violating their essence. So that rights aren't given by the government. Rights are already there, so this argument goes, and that the government just acknowledges the rights that are already there. And that's an important distinction. So life is the most basic, unalienable right. The government can't take or use somebody's life without violating it. Obviously, capital punishment becomes a really interesting issue here. We don't have time now to go into it, but this is like the fundamental right. Liberty is another inalienable right. Nobody has the right to make fundamental decisions about another man's life, who he marries, what his profession is, where he lives. The government can't dictate these issues to its citizens. So also the pursuit of happiness is right. So the government won't stop men from pursuing what in their own sense will lead them to a good life and a happy life unless that pursuit infringes on somebody else's ability to pursue his own sense of happiness. It's not that some people, like nobles, deserve happiness and get to pursue their happiness and other people have to serve them. Everybody has a right to pursue happiness. All men, at least, or all landholding white men at the beginning of the process, and then it gradually gets expanded. So questions that remain from the document, like who counts as men? All men are created equal, but we start the country with slavery and women can't vote. And on and on. So who counts as men? Does a respect for equality imply the government should intervene in social life to boost equality of opportunity or equality of outcome? Like, or what does that mean in practice? If some people have very little or are born into poverty, should they get a boost so that they have a good shot at a full life or not? Is that not what equality means? Does respect for liberty mean the government will prevent interference in the life plans people have, or will it also imply that the government will support people in developing their life plans? So again, if you're born in terrible circumstances where you can't really pursue anything, will the government intervene to help you have liberty to pursue things? And you pursue your life plans, and we'll talk about that more. Does respecting a man's pursuit of happiness mean merely prohibiting interference in his life projects, or does it also involve providing him with tools to pursue happiness? So, for instance, should every kid have an education, and should it be a good one, or is that not a right? Right. So, is this more or less freedoms from coercion, or is the government supposed to help people develop freedom to actually do things? And we'll talk about that difference a lot. Freedom from, freedom to. So some pretty epic contradictions and lapses between the promises of the Declaration and the first Constitution. Thomas Jefferson, the guy who writes the Constitution, has hundreds of slaves, sells them away from their families, and doesn't even free them when he dies. Like, what's going on with that? He was anti-slavery, but he owns slaves. Like, what is going on there? And then, I mean, all the concerns with eliminating, birthright and like not having nobles and commoners differences. Only landholding white guys really had full rights at the beginning of the country. Women were denied the rights attributed to men, and on and on. And we're going to think about this throughout the whole year. How did we go from that beginning to having more and more people with more and more rights that are supposed to be announced in the Declaration and guaranteed by the Constitution? So take a minute to reflect, and we'll probably write on this. Like, what do you think's going on there? Why would people who could see with their mind that it's wrong for there to be some people with rights and others without rights, why did they allow a government to be formed where some people had far more rights than other people had rights? And to the extent that this issue continues with us today, what is going on there? Why does this issue continue? Why do some people want that to be the case, that some people have more rights than others? So we're going to talk about the perpetual journey of American freedom throughout the year. In some ways, this is the first step in that journey. Americans will not be tools for the well-being of European aristocrats, but rather valued in their own lives. That's a good way to summarize the place of the Declaration of Independence in the perpetual journey of American freedom. So takeaways: you should memorize the "We Hold These Truths" part of the document from slide 3, that preamble that's in green on that slide. You should be able to explain how the relation of rulers to ruled is exceptional in the American founding. You should be able to recall and analyze the rights declared by the Declaration. You should be able to discuss some of the unanswered questions about the meaning of the Declaration. You should be able to recall and discuss some of the major contradictions and lapses that the founding involves. You should understand the Declaration's significance in the perpetual journey of American freedom.